6 years. Yeah, so welcome to everyone to this webinar. We have at the Geneva Academy of National Humanitarian Human Rights, we have a project on the right to seeds since now 6 years. We've done many other webinars with partners at the national level in the last years. And so we are very happy to be with you today to discuss this topic from the perspective of the Hungary. So I will just, so the program you have understood, there will be a first part during which I will speak, and then Karin Pesha from the Academy and Fulya Batour from Kibele and the Geneva Academy will do a presentation. And then we will have the perspectives of stakeholders from Hungary. And then we will have Ambassador Zoltán Kálmán, who will do the concluding remarks after the discussion between all of us. So we are very honored to have all of you today at this webinar. So I'll just share a few information with you. So it is our project on the right to seeds in Europe. It's on the Geneva Academy website. I have sent you the link in the chat. So we've put everything we did in the last 6 years, and so we have a number of publications. One important publication is it's this one. No, it's this one, briefing. So it's a practical manual on the right to seeds in Europe. So in which we explain what the right to seeds is and why it is important in Europe. We've done also in the same webpage, you have a summary that we published in English and in other languages with key messages and recommendations. Then on the same page, you also have the link to the Universal Declaration on the Rights, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. This declaration was adopted in 2018 by the United Nations General Assembly. Karin will explain it is in this declaration that there is an Article 19 on the right to seeds that is important for our discussion. What is also important is that everything we discuss is also based on the right to food, okay? And the whole negotiation of this declaration has been based on the right to food. And what is important is that the right to food is binding now for all EU member states. They have all accepted the international treaty on economic, social, and cultural rights, the international covenant. In 1966, it was adopted. So the right food is binding, and states need to take steps now to implement the right food. And with this declaration, we think that now states need also to implement the right food, including the right to seeds for conservation, for peasants communities, and others. That's what we will discuss today. And then so from that, we have it's also on the same page. We've done two things. One is to publish something on how we should interpret. There is an international treaty on plant genetic resources for food and agriculture that was adopted in 2008 at FAO by many states. And so there is an Article 9 on farmers' rights in this treaty and how farmers' rights should be protected. And so we have done something on how this international plant treaty should be interpreted with the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants that was adopted in 2018. And we've drafted that with many experts of the United Nations, including Michael Fakhri, who is the current Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Hilal Elver, who was the former one, Olivier de Scutter was also the former one, and Professor José Esquinas was for many years the secretary of the Plant Treaty. The last thing I want to share, and then it will be my colleagues Karin and Fulya who will give you more information about the link of this right to seeds and the current reform at the EU on seed marketing rules. We've done an analysis of the current discussions at the EU level on seed marketing and how this is related to the right food and the right seeds and the UN Declaration of Rights of Peasants. So this is also available, and I will send you the link in the chat. But we make recommendations to make sure that in the revision of the seed marketing rules, the human rights, right to food, right to seeds, will be taken into account. So that's the main objective of our project, and so we are very happy to be with all of you today. And now I will ask Karine to continue with her presentation.
Thank you, Christophe. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So now I'd like to take a few minutes to explain in more detail some of the articles of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas that are most relevant to our discussion today and to the reform of the EU seed marketing legislation. In particular, Article 19, known as the Article on the Right to Seeds. It's important to know that this article was one of the most debated and one of the most controversial articles during the negotiation of the declaration. Article 19 is the reason why many European states were against the declaration from the beginning, and also why they abstained from voting on its adoption. And one of the main reasons that this article was so controversial is that many of the rights that are recognized to peasants in the declaration are rights that are already established in other international human rights instruments, whereas the Article on the Right to Seeds create what we call new rights in international law, and that's always more controversial. So, but it's important to know that how states vote becomes irrelevant once the declaration is adopted. So if you look at the text of the declaration and its preamble, it says that the General Assembly invites governments, agencies, and organizations of the UN systems, as well as intergovernmental and organizations and NGOs to disseminate the declaration and to promote universal respect and understanding. So this reflects the understanding that member states need to apply international instruments adopted by the UN General Assembly in good faith. Now, if we look at some of the provision, I'd like to first draw attention to Article 1 here. So Article 1 is really important because it defines the term peasants and other people working in rural areas. In other words, the rights holders of this declaration, the people that can claim the rights that are established by Undrop. And if we look at the definition, I won't read the whole definition, but the term applies not only to those who engage in small-scale agricultural production, but also to those who engage in livestock raising, pastoralism, fishing, forestry, hunting, etc., as well as the dependents. Peasants also include migrant and seasonal workers. And finally, it's really interesting that peasants are defined as those who have a special dependency on and attachment to the land. So overall, we have a very detailed and inclusive definitions of peasants and other people working in rural areas. Now I'd like to jump to Article 2.4. Which is also highly relevant to our discussion today. This article says that states must interpret and apply relevant international agreements in a manner consistent with their human rights obligations. And this article is reinforced by Article 9.8. Sorry, 19.8 here. Which says that states must ensure that seed policies, plant variety protection, and other intellectual property laws, certification schemes, and seed marketing laws respect and take into account the rights, the needs, and the realities of peasants. So if you take these two articles together, what this means is that states must apply international agreements in the area of intellectual property and seed marketing in accordance with their human rights obligation under the declaration. In other words, intellectual property or seed marketing laws must not lead to violation of peasants' rights because human rights takes precedence over other types of legal norms. And now I'd like to look at Article 19 in more detail. So Article 19.1 A to D, is very close to the text of the farmers' rights provisions of the plant treaty that was adopted at the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, in 2001. So this part of Article 19 reproduces almost word by word Article 9 of the plant treaty. So these are the provisions on the protection of traditional knowledge, on access and benefit sharing, on the right to participate, and also on the right to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-safe seeds. But the declaration goes further than the plant treaty. If we look at 19.2, it says that peasants have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their own seeds and traditional knowledge. And then starting with 19.3 all the way to 19.8, this Article 19 defines state obligations related to the right to seeds. So 19.3 says that state must take measures to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to seeds of peasants. 19.4 states must ensure that seeds of sufficient quality and quantity are available to peasants at the most suitable time for planting and at an affordable price. 19.5 says that states must recognize the rights of peasants to rely either on their own seeds or on other locally available seeds of their choice and to decide on the crops and species that they wish to grow. And then 19.6 is really important because it refers explicitly to peasant seed systems. So this article says states must take measures to support peasant seed systems and promote the use of peasant seeds and agrobiodiversity. And this is really important because, as we know, states have supported commercial seed systems for decades, but peasant seed systems have not received the same kind of support. And now with Undrop, for the first time in an international instrument, the existence and importance of peasant seed systems is acknowledged. 19.7, states must take measures to ensure that agricultural research and development integrates the needs of peasants and to ensure their active participation in the definition of priorities and the undertaking of research and development. And then 19.8, I've already mentioned earlier. So Christophe has already touched on this, but I'd like to come back briefly to the relationship between the plant treaty and Undrop, because that's something that often comes up. So we can say that farmers' rights were recognized in international law with the adoption of the plant treaty in 2001. But the significance of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants is that, first, the right to seed is now recognized in international human rights law. Second, the rights holders are clearly defined in a very inclusive manner. Third, the different elements of the right to seeds are specified. And finally, the declaration also stipulates state obligations in relation to the right to seeds. So this is why it is important to use the plant treaty and the UN Declaration in conjunction, because they're complementary and they're mutually supporting. So on the one hand, we have the legally binding plant treaty establishing farmers' rights to seeds. And on the other, we have a declaration that establishes peasants' right to seeds as human rights and also in a more elaborate way. So I'll stop here and I'll let Fully explain now the relevance of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants in the context of the current reform of the EU seed marketing legislation.
We don't hear you, Fully.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. So I'll take you now into the world of EU seed marketing legislation and make links with the Undrop declaration that you have just heard about. Let's go. So the declaration, just to make it a bit clearer and easier for you to understand throughout the presentation. So it establishes some rights, codifies some rights, the right to save, use, exchange, and sell their own seeds for peasants and people living in rural areas, the right to maintain, control, develop their own seeds, the right to have access to locally adapted seeds, the right to participate in decision-making, and the right to the protection of their traditional knowledge and have a sharing of benefits arising from the use of their own seeds. It also goes hand in hand with state obligations, like Karen mentioned. So states need to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to seeds. This is traditional human rights language. But they also need to support peasant seed systems and promote the use of peasant seeds and agrobiodiversity and ensure participation of peasants in decision making. I'm just making this so that you have this framework in in your mind when I'm talking about legislation. These rights are affected indeed by numerous laws. So some seed laws and seed policies in the EU and abroad are concerned more with ownership, so intellectual property rights, which provide a monopoly for inventions, new plant varieties, or new, for instance, identified genetic sequences in the case of patents. They also provide ownership over traditional knowledge with access and benefit sharing laws. You can also have rules on food safety and plant and seed health, where the goal is more protection of the environment and also of the humans that care for it and live within it, right? And a third set of legislation that impacts it is the seed marketing legislation, which sets conditions for the sale of seeds and the quality of the seeds that are sold. It's different to plant variety protection, where the idea is to provide a monopoly and incentivize plant breeding and innovation. Here, it's about conditions to market seeds. We're not at the idea and the level of a monopoly, but really about market access. How does it work in the EU? We have 12 so-called directives, which need to be transposed in 27 national seed marketing rules. There are two instruments, legal instruments, that could be used by the EU. One is a regulation that's directly applicable, and the other one is a directive that needs a national legislation to really show all of its effects. Right now, we are under 12 directives. Each of them look at certain crop species, and they come from the 1930s at national level mostly, and have been put up at EU level in the 1960s. We're in a context of underproduction, post-war reconstruction, and the idea is that you need a seed marketing legislation to protect farmers against bad quality and fraudulent seeds. And for that, the way that has been chosen, the path that has been chosen by the EU, is to ensure identity, quality, and productivity for industrial agriculture by having mandatory pre-marketing registration of seeds and also operators. It depends on the crop species. Have also established seed quality criteria, seed production rules, and have labeling rules, all of this being controlled by public authorities. Okay, and the principle is that only certified seeds of registered varieties that are distinct, stable, and uniform are allowed on the market. That's the principle that really is at the basis of seed marketing legislation. So how does it link up with Undrop and peasant seed systems and all the rights that have been recognized under Undrop? They're essentially in the sideways. So you find room for them in exclusion from the scope of legislation. So by things that are not viewed as marketing, and also by derogations to this main principle that only registered DUS varieties can find their way into the market. I'm gonna break it down a little bit. So what kind of questions do you need to ask where you have a legislation in front of you to see whether it's Undrop compatible? Are seed exchanges and the sale of seeds between farmers considered as seed marketing? Because if it is, then they need to register their seeds, they need to comply with all quality criteria, and they need to label the seeds with an official label. It costs a lot of money. It requires a lot of adjustments, and it's not fit for peasant seed systems. All of this right now depends on the national law and the interpretation of marketing and professional operators. So you have certain countries in the EU where it's nice to be a peasant, like Denmark, where non-commercial use of seeds is not viewed as marketing. It's really when it becomes a commercial exploitation and it's defined in guidelines where you need to comply with the legislation. Whereas, for instance, the Estonians have a very restrictive interpretation of the legislation, very close to the one of the European Commission. The second big question or set of questions that you need to ask is whether farmers can develop their own varieties and sell them. Does the seed market cater to their needs? So do they find seeds of varieties that are adapted to their growing conditions, and is the marketing, therefore, of locally adapted varieties for low input agriculture allowed. And here it's the derogations. You have two pathways, right, with sizable differences between member states in the interpretation and implementation, especially, of the regimes. One is the conservation variety route, and the other is amateur, only for vegetables. I'm going to come to this a bit later on. And the second pathway that is quite new, like not even 6 years old, is organic heterogeneous material that comes from the organic regulation. So very little room. And the third big question is, are there governance mechanisms that ensure that the peasants can participate in decision making and that their seeds are protected against misappropriation? In the seed directives, there's nothing on this, really nothing. And so everything depends on national law, and especially private, but also administrative law. So everything that relates to appeals, the notion of a person of interest who can lodge an appeal, for instance, against variety that's been registered under the name of a landrace, let's see, or a variety that's been circulating in local seed system. All of this, it depends on national law. No, the EU does not say anything about it. So there's very little margin of action today for peasant seed systems. There's no real recognition of farmers' knowledge in the EU seed legislation or elsewhere, like in the legislation that implements the Nagoya Protocol or the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. There's not much, unfortunately, recognition of farmers' knowledge. And most marketed varieties do not correspond to their needs. They're all distinct, uniform, and stable. That's not what small-scale agriculture needs. It needs more heterogeneity, local adaptation to conditions, and adaptability and resilience. It does not necessarily need to be uniform. So what's going on? 10 years ago already, a reform of the seed marketing legislation was started by the European Commission, but it failed because the European Parliament rejected it. So we started again with a proposal that, I mean, we started way before the proposal with a lot of stakeholder consultation, etc., like the classical European route. There was a study and a proposal by the European Commission, which is the guardian of the EU treaties, was tabled in July 2023. And then the file went to the two co-legislators in EU law, the European Parliament, which represents the EU people, and the Council of the EU, which represents the EU governments. Now we have the position of the European Parliament on the file, which was adopted in plenary in April 2024. We have a new parliament, but that position still holds. So they can reopen it for a vote, but I don't think it's going to happen because a lead rapporteur on the file, so you have one member of the European Parliament, which is the head of the file, let's say, or the representative of the file. It's called the rapporteur, is the same. It's Herbert Dorfman from Italy, the group of European People's Party. And he has been re-elected, and most of the shadow rapporteurs in other political groups have also been re-elected. So the position is, I think, pretty solid. We're still waiting for the position of the Council of the EU. So they need to adopt what is called a general approach in early 2025, we think. I mean, everything can change, but that's the calendar that's been established. And now once we have the two institutions' positions on the Commission proposal, the three of them come together and negotiate in what is called trilogue, so tripartite negotiations, and they try to find common ground and build compromises, okay? And that's only after the trilogues and those negotiations will we have a new regulation for seed marketing in the EU. It could take a long time. It could go very fastly, but it could also take a long time. The negotiations on the organic regulation took, I think, more than 3 years, if memory serves me well. So what do we have? Today, again, I'm just going to repeat it a little bit so that it sticks. We have 12 directives, slightly different rules per crop species. Some are more flexible, easier than others. Agricultural crop species are notoriously more difficult. to register varieties, etc. And the main principle is you have two pillars. For regulated species, only seeds of registered varieties can be marketed. And you register either or, and sometimes it's both, as a professional operator, or you register a plant variety using the criteria of DUS, so distinctiveness, uniformity, stability, which actually come from intellectual property rights legislation, so from the UPOV convention, and it's not necessarily designed as a seed market access criteria, but rather as criteria that was developed to give a monopoly right over a plant variety. It's just been transposed and then mirrored in seed marketing legislation in the EU. You also have an additional test that determines the value for cultivation and use of the variety. So that really looks at what the variety does on the field and how it compares to others. Whereas dust testing only looks at the identity of the plant and allows it to be different and show, and tests whether it's different from the others. And if all the units are the same, so there's uniformity inside. You have seed lot certification, that's mandatory, except in certain little derogations like vegetable sander seed or fruit cack material. For farmer seed systems or agrobiodiversity conservation, you need to look, as I mentioned, at what is not marketing. Okay, so everything depends on the definition and interpretation of marketing, which is linked to the commercial exploitation of seeds. So it all depends on member states. Certain member states, you have actually a lot of room for in situ conservation. In others, very little. In certain countries, farmers can actually exchange and thrive within their communities. In other countries, like Estonia, for instance, they cannot. So there's no express recognition. Everything really depends at national level. With regards to the formal seed market, what caters to the needs of peasants is two derogation regimes for varieties that are not DUS, so not distinct, uniform, stable. Since 2008, conservation varieties. So you need to show, you can register a conservation variety if you show that it's at risk of genetic erosion, only for agricultural and vegetable species, and you can market and can produce the seeds and market them within quantity limits and in a region of origin for conservation varieties. Since 2018, you also can market seeds of organic heterogeneous material, which is a notification system based on the description that really breaks with the model of the catalog that we call. So when you register a variety, you register it and list it in a catalog, right? And conservation varieties are the exception. So they have a room, they can be registered in the common EU catalog, but there are a lot of restrictions around them right now. What the Commission proposal does, it does not really reinvent the wheel. The big change is that it replaces 12 directives where member states have a lot of actually margin of maneuver by one regulation that is directly applicable, okay, except for ornamentals and forests. The two-pillar system remains the same. You have it for regulated species that are the same as today, so there's not much change there. The only change that's really crucial is that because you're combining 12 directives from the different species, the registration of both professional operators and plant varieties will be mandatory for everything, for everyone. And also in the common route to the market, they create this system of testing not only distinctiveness, uniformity, stability, but also the value for sustainable cultivation and use for all crop species. So they want to look at actually how a variety behaves on the ground and how it could contribute to reaching sustainability objectives like using less water, using less herbicides. Ideally, that would be this. The second pillar is that once you've registered your variety, you need to certify seed lots. That doesn't change. it is still mandatory for agricultural crops, but you have a bit more exceptions than today. Because there are a lot of annexes that, for instance, highlight how you can produce standard seeds or standard material, etc. So it's a bit larger, but not changing too much. The big change is to alleviate the administrative burden and the cost of this entire system to the state, because it's very costly as a system, because it relies on public controls a lot. They allow, they propose to allow, the Commission proposes to allow the certification to be done by professional operators themselves while being controlled by public authorities. This is something that was really the key, also a key demand of both member states and the industry, the seed industry, for the past 20 years. So, and for farmer seed systems, a lot is changing because you're confronted with a regulation where the idea and the proposal is that all transfers are in principle marketing, except for research. So honestly, I have no idea of another market good where simple exchange is equaling marketing. That's already the perception and the principle that the Commission proposal is building on. And then they say, okay, all transfers are usually marketing, but if you're a gene bank or you have a non-profit purpose to conserve agrobiodiversity, then you don't need to follow all the rules. It's not really marketing, but you can notify your activity, you have a description and a list available there with, you need to follow certain quality and sanitary rules, but we allow you to circulate and market seeds, but it's very limited. It's not even, they couldn't even sell it to farmers, like, or give it away to farmers, not just selling, but give it away to farmers for them to multiply. That would be viewed as marketing. You also have special rules for farmers exchange, Article 30 of the proposal, but it's only for seeds. So they say essentially, okay, normally this would be marketing, but we're going to allow you to do this without the restrictive rules, just have little ones. So you cannot do this with protected varieties. So under UPOV, you still have quality and sanitary rules that are very similar to the ones to the formal seed market. And you need to remain in quantities that are limited by states. For the formal seed market, that's where a lot of stuff also changes, because that's the core also of the legislation. It's to create a seed market. So there's a lot of diversification here. Conservation varieties, that's completely changed, because the Commission proposes to have it for both old, locally adapted varieties, but also new ones. So that are, for instance, developed with participatory plant breeding efforts, but will generate things that are not distinct, uniform, and stable, because this is not what is wanted. And it's open to all species with an officially recognized description, so quite easy system, and sold as standard seed or material. And they also propose to have heterogeneous material that is not just organic, but that could also be conventional, okay, and with a notification based on a description. I'll go a bit quicker, so in the interest of time. The EU Parliament position, and so the idea is that it presents and votes on amendments to the Commission proposal, okay, so that you can get to a compromise at the end. I'll just highlight the things that have changed compared to the Commission proposal. Here at the EU Parliament position, you have a longer list of regulated species. This is a bit concerning because, for instance, in very small markets like quinoa, putting quinoa seeds in a regulated seed market means that you're going to have to follow all the rules. So register varieties and certify seed lots to be able to sell. So it can actually undermine the development of underutilized crops. It's a bit counterintuitive, but we can discuss this. But more regulation will not necessarily mean more seed. It will mean more quality seeds, more certified seeds, but it might actually mean less operators and less total quantity of seeds. What the European Parliament also does is that they say that this additional test of value for sustainable cultivation and use will be optional for vegetable and fruits, and you could actually sell seeds of conservation varieties as standard, so it's easier than certified seeds. This was a big problem and is still a big problem, because in agricultural crops species, so in cereals, for instance, you still need to certify the seeds of conservation varieties, whereas the market is really small. So going into the cost of certifying seeds for such smaller markets does not make sense. So it was a big obstacle to the development of conservation variety markets. The big things that the parliament do actually are in the area of farmer seed systems and agrobiodiversity conservation. So what we call the scope of the legislation, because they really worked on what should not be covered by the legislation. And it's now clear that the exchange of seed between private persons for on-farm research and for the dynamic conservation of agrobiodiversity in quantity limits that are set, actually they're quite low, but they really allow you to exchange seeds just to revive it, right? Like you get something from a gene bank and then you just multiply it to see if it lives again and how it behaves, right? So all of that should be out of the seed legislation according to the parliament. Then they have relaxed rules for gene banks, so Article 29, to have more types of movements and especially include farmers within this article. So have a better link between conservation networks, gene banks, and farmers. That is completely aligned with the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. And they also propose to have expanded rules for farmers exchange. So they set off the fact that there couldn't be any money involved. It's for all plant reproductive material, so it means it's also for onions, for potatoes, for tubers. And the quantities should be set by the European Commission, not the states, but based on the needs of small farmers. For the formal seed market, there's little differences, but it's not much because the Commission proposal already went quite far. There's just slight changes in the definition of conservation varieties and a bit lighter rules for standard seed production. And for heterogeneous material, the preamble now says in the European Parliament position that it cannot be a GMO, or it cannot be obtained by new genomic techniques. And it's more aligned to the system we have now in organic, so it's for free, etc. That was not proposed by the European Commission. There's also certain things about the fact that stakeholders need to be consulted and can provide documentation on names and the identity of varieties. So it's kind of a procedural safeguard that could be used by peasant organizations or others, seed saving organizations, for instance, to fight misappropriation. But it's very light. In the council position, as we know it, so there's a progress report that was issued by the Belgian presidency, which can always change. It's just a progress report. So what we know so far is that you have even a longer list of regulated species than the parliament. Okay, and they also, I think, foresee having the conservation varieties route and heterogeneous material route only in certain species. They also want to alleviate the burden of national authorities because, as I said, the system really costs a lot of money and takes a long time, but they still maintain the two pillars: registered varieties, certified seeds. For the scope of the legislation, they don't say too much, but they still say the gene banks are automatically out. They're not going to do marketing, or what they do will not be considered marketing. But conservation networks can use Article 29 to actually exchange and sell seeds, including to farmers, with very light rules. Okay, so this is quite good. And there's no quantity limits here. But you still have a lot of quality and sanitary rules to comply with. For Article 30, so the farmers' exchange, they don't want monetary compensation, even in the framework of mutual aid. The thing that I find a bit sad is that they take away this mention of dynamic agrobiodiversity management, because in the Commission proposal, the recognition of this, you know, of the job that is the great work that is done by farmers to manage and conserve agrobiodiversity was actually recognized, and it's not anymore in this council position, draft position, and it would be only allowed for local exchange that should be defined by the state. So limit a bit the quantity and the geography in which the farmers could sell and exchange seeds. And not sell, just exchange for the council. In terms of the formal seed market, this is what they're discussing right now. And apparently the conservation varieties regime is proving to be quite contentious, because they don't see how this regime could have inside both old and new varieties, which is the case actually in Switzerland. With the concept of niche varieties in Switzerland, you have actually old land races that are registered as niche varieties. New ecotypes, they call it in Swiss legislation, can be registered as niche varieties, or deleted varieties. So varieties that have been deleted, so there's no real market interest, but there's a conservation interest or a gardening interest. There's something, and they should be maintained. So you know, you do have this regime in Switzerland, but apparently it's contentious for the EU member states. And as well for heterogeneous material, it's not clear how they're going to link it and what kind of compromise they will reach at the end between themselves. So to conclude, just to remember the state obligations that they have according to the declaration. They have to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to seeds. So they have to go through all of the things. They also need to support peasant seed systems, promote the use of peasant seeds and agrobiodiversity, and ensure participation. Have you really seen this? Not really. For the right to save, use, exchange, sell their own seeds, there are attempts, definitely, through Article 30, but all exchange of seed is still viewed as marketing, and it's not clear whether it will be the marketing with monetary compensations, or exchange of seed with monetary compensation will be allowed. And currently the criteria, the quality criteria, so the seeds have to be free from quality pests. That means that you apply essentially the rules that have been enacted for industrial crop production to farmer seed systems. With regards to the right to maintain, control, and develop their own seeds, and the right to have access to locally adapted seeds, it's not bad, honestly. The diversification of the EU seed market is really well underway. You're going to have a real, I think, pathways to market non-DOS varieties and material, but there's not much on the right to maintain and control their seeds, especially just this participation in the registration process that only comes from the European Parliament. So we don't know how it will look at the end. And so again, with regards to the right to participate in decision-making or the right to have protection of traditional knowledge, there's not much present, almost nothing, I could say honestly, in the EU seed marketing proposal. And maybe a question that we should ask is whether when you codify peasant knowledge, is that a first step towards protecting it, or is it the first step toward misappropriation? And how do we need to devise a system, or how could a system be devised that a codification is actually a barrier against misappropriation and not something that allows other actors to actually take the control and ownership over something that's been held within these communities for ages. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Julia. Yes, it's so now we will I don't know, should we ask questions at this stage?
We can look at the questions in the chat. I don't know if
there
you've
was only
seen them.
one question,
I'm
but
trying to.
there was only one question that we responded to.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. So maybe we pass to the second part of the discussion.
Yeah, we're
Yes.
going to get into the Hungarian stakeholders. So hearing from you, that would be great. I'm really looking forward. So we're going to first hear from Katalin Reti. I hope I'm not scrambling your name. Thank
Okay.
you. Is
Katalin.
that good? Yes. Do you have a presentation, or are you going to
I don't have a presentation.
Okay, then I'll
I
just
have a
spotlight you.
presentation.
And you may speak in Hungarian or English, just
I
as you
wrote my notes in English, so if it's okay, I keep with English. I'm quite new to this field, so I was trying to get caught up. Hello, my name is Katalin Reti, and I am the president of Makház Association, the network for preserving agrobiodiversity in Hungary. And I am also a small-scale farmer. I grow vegetables and herbs and edible flowers. But honestly, when reading the proposals and reading your opinion papers, what really caught me was that it is quite unrealistic for how we work as small-scale farmers, because what you need to understand is all Makház farmers, so all the seed savers who are within our network, who are quite a big chunk of vegetable seed savers in Hungary, are working in very diverse systems and very diverse ways. So any kind of regulation, any kind of administrative burden that tries to control that the way we work will really set back our efforts. I think I thought maybe I explain now how the regulations in Hungary affect us currently, because I think compared to other European countries, we are somewhere in the middle of how liberal and free we can work with seeds. And as the members of Makház, and I'm also a farmer who does research, I work together with the National Gene Bank. And currently what we can do is we are on-farm partners. We are also in other partnerships projects together with the Gene Bank. These are sometimes Horizon research projects. So when varieties come out from the Gene Bank and end up in our fields, we get to multiply them freely. We get to exchange them freely among ourselves. And also we get to use them to grow fruit, to grow crops. And you haven't mentioned it now, I think, but there is also a question of, do we have to separate producing food from producing seeds? And right now our reality is we do not separate it. We grow food, we take into consideration the isolation distances. We have some seed saving plots that are used for multiplying in larger numbers. But the reality is also that we grow heirloom pumpkins and we take it to the market, but it's the same plot where I take my 10 pieces of pumpkins and I will carve out the seeds to save for next year. And like this is one problem. And if the Gene Bank would not allow to give me seeds because I'm a market gardener, right? But I'm also a researcher and I'm also a community seed saver. I also, exchange my seeds with others and we give them out for free. And also Makház Association gives out seeds through their farmers each year. So whatever strict regulations there would be in place, and we are talking about hundreds of varieties, maybe in the thousands of varieties just in our network in Hungary. If every single package has to be traced back to plots, and if every single producer has to be registered as a professional, and if we have to comply by rules of how the big seeds companies have to comply, and I do agree that big seeds companies have to comply with that, but it is just not the reality. So if these very strict regulations are put into practice, what's going to happen is either, and Hungarians are, I think, quite in general quite creative nation when it comes to working in gray zones and in the illegality. But I don't think that's a solution. I don't think we should push farmers and seed savers to illegality, because believe me, like, we're still gonna exchange seeds. We're still gonna, like, farmers are going to find like little side roads of how to get by, but that is really, really hindering I think the efforts we have put in the last year since we're doing this to raise awareness to agrobiodiversity, to try to raise awareness to the different varieties we are working with, and to, I think what it really comes down to is to get these seeds and get these varieties to as many home gardeners and to as many farmers as possible. And yeah, I think I was also, when I was reading your background documents, I think this question of professional operator, like, yeah, do I have to like pick between taking my vegetables to the market or saving seeds? Like, I find that, and then being able to access the seeds from the gene bank, or do I have to then go around and tell my mother to, like, please go register with the gene bank and get me some seeds because I'm not allowed to? Like, this is all just very unrealistic. Yes, so I really, really hope that that whatever rights to seeds for the farmers are defined by United Nations, that these rights will be reflected in the European policies. And I also do believe that there needs to be some form of regulation. There needs to be definitions of what kind of, like, I think this kind of what you also mentioned now, conservation varieties. The reality is that we have changing conditions. So of course we try to go back to the old kind of varieties, to old heirlooms that are locally adapted. But I think on a European level, we have to be able that between countries, between regions, we have to be able to exchange those seeds freely. And I think even market those seeds freely, because when someone is putting work into something, to making an effort to do research and say, okay, I found some variety of a vegetable or some variety of a crop that is adapted to certain conditions, but it's not a uniform variety, it's not a professional variety, but it is something for the small-scale farmer to maybe trial. It can be a drought-ridden area in Hungary, and it can be a drought-ridden area in Spain, you know? And I think between the countries, between the farmers of Europe, there needs to be a way to exchange these seeds without saying, oh, but this is not from your region, oh, but this is not an old variety, this is something newly adapted, you know? I think, so I also support that personally, that conservation variety is something, like you said, use the word, I think it's a very good word for it, like niche varieties. And that these niche varieties, when the farmers are small-scale farmers, when they are not companies, but family farmers and self-sufficiency farmers and small-scale market gardeners or fruit growers, or what, you know, that they have to be enabled to exchange seeds liberally, even for money, because again, we work, you know, like we have income from selling our crops. That's one piece of reality. The other reality is that we get income from doing research. I think farmers should also have more income from doing research and doing variety trials. And then when they put in the effort to trial something new, it is our reality also now that we do research with legumes, and farmers have to be able to sell seeds of new varieties of underutilized crops that are not yet registered to be something like very like a uniform variety, and maybe they never will. So I really support that your work that you're doing to find ways to support the small farmers to be able to keep their seed systems as it is. And I think not as it is, but in a way that really supports this exchange and even for money, and really supports the farmers not to be burdened by more and more administrative things, because honestly, we do a lot. I'm sorry, but we work hard. And if you're growing for the market, if you're growing for research, if you have community, I think everyone, for example, in our Makhaz community works very, very hard, because we don't rely on subsidies, most of us. We rely on the income that we make from our work, by marketing, by research. So yeah, whatever more burdens you put on us to like fill in more papers, to get this machinery, to do this kind of, believe us that since it is in our interest, you know, to keep good quality seed and to share good quality seed, because that is our work, that is the product of our work. I think it has to be kept within reasonable regulations of what you can expect from a small farmer to do in the names of quality control. These were my thoughts I had on notes on, but maybe you have some questions.
No, I think I'm fine. Thank you so much for this at least for me, very enlightening and compelling intervention. I agree with you. The definition of professional operators, it is going to be key, and it's hard for the Brussels bubble to understand how many hats you keep. So it's good that you now today actually a bit talk about all the hats you have on your head. And I'll introduce someone else who has a lot of hats also on her head. And I'll give the floor to Judith, and then we'll do the discussion round also after Agoston's publication intervention. Judith, I'll let you introduce yourself. Is that okay?
Thank you. I'm trying to share my presentation and I hope it will work. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Still not?
Yes.
Ah, okay,
coming.
sorry.
Great.
And now from the beginning. Yes. So, yeah, just a quick intro. I was preparing my presentation in Hungarian, and I think it's useful also for the participants to get familiar a bit and get a repetition on what was said already, because there isn't too much new that wasn't already said. But just quickly about myself. So I'm one of the founding members of Makhaz Association, and I'm a biologist and plant breeder, and I'm working as a researcher in the field of agrobiodiversity management and looking into sustainable food systems where also agrobiodiversity takes a big part. So for today, I prepared some slides. Yeah, I will switch to Hungarian, sorry. Néhány diát készítettem a mai előadásra, amiben bemutatom, hogy is áll jelenleg Magyarországon a szabályozás, ami így a Makház tevékenységét is körülhatárolja, illetve hogy az új jogszabálytervezet milyen módon tudja pozitívan vagy negatívan befolyásolni a tevékenységeinket, vagy nem is befolyásolni, de hogy milyen korlátokat vagy lehetőségeket tud a Makház elé állítani. Ugye Magyarországon van egy nagyon jól működő állami génbank, ahol az ex situ génmegőrzés kiválóan működik, és világszintű minőségi tevékenységet folytatnak, és a Kati már beszélt is arról, hogy a Makház és a tápiószelei génbank között egyre erősödő együttműködés alakult ki az elmúlt években, és ennek kapcsán szeretném kiemelni, hogy a FAO egyezmény miatt ugye nem csak az ex situ génmegőrzés kötelező az egyezményt aláíró tagországokban, hanem az in situ génmegőrzés is. Ennek kapcsán készült egy génmegőrzési stratégia is. Sajnos ehhez akcióterv nem nagyon készült, illetve amennyire tudom, most folyamatban van. Viszont a génbanknak a kapacitásai korlátozottak, így emiatt is vette föl a kapcsolatot a génbank a magházzal, hogy pontosan az in situ on-farm génmegőrzés kapcsán tudjunk együttműködni, és ugye ezt a tevékenységet jobban kiteljesíteni. A másik érdekes dolog, ami tavaly, illetve igen, a tavalyi év folyamán indult, illetve az idei évben dolgoztuk ki a mezőgazdasági minisztériummal. Ez, ahogy itt a jobb oldalon látható, egy növényi genetikai erőforrások in situ megőrzése, ami az ex situ megőrzés mellé jönne, és kifejezetten gazdálkodókat támogatna ez a támogatási rendszer, mégpedig a nem regisztrált fajták, tájfajták, régi fajtáknak a termesztésben való megőrzését. És ehhez ugye elengedhetetlen, hogy egy olyan jogszabályi környezetet tudjunk biztosítani, amiben ez működni is tud aztán a végén, mivel hogy ahogy itt meg is fogalmazódik, ez nagyon fontos lenne az éghajlatváltozás okozta problémáknak a küzdelmében, illetve a genetikai eróziónak a megakadályozása miatt. Csak egy rövid kitérő, mivel az ex situ génmegőrzés az ugye egy adott helyen történik, ahol több 10 évente vetnek ki egy-egy tételt, amikor annak a csírázó képessége lecsökken, és már csak amiatt, hogy egy adott helyen szaporítják fel az adott fajtát, egy rendkívül nagy genetikai diverzitás csökkenés történik meg, mivel a természetes környezet egyfajta szelekciós folyamatot indít be, úgyhogy emiatt lenne nagyon fontos, hogy az ex situ génmegőrzést in situ on-farm megőrzésre is kiegészítsük, hogy ezt a fajta környezeti géneróziót visszafogjuk. És ugye kutatásokból látjuk, hogyha egy divers fajtát különböző környezetben vetünk ki, rendkívüli módon megnő annak a genetikai diverzitása. A magházról csak nagyon röviden, mivel ugye a jogszabály, ahogy már Kat is elmondta, bizonyos dolgok miatt elősegítheti vagy akadályozhatja a tevékenységeinket. Tehát a Magház Egyesület az egy decentralizált rendszerben működik, ahol különböző hobbikertészek, illetve kisléptékű gazdálkodók az ország különböző területén a saját kertjükben, saját termőföldjükön tartják fenn a gyűjteményben lévő fajtákat, és ezeket a tagsági körben, illetve magbőrzéken csereberélik ezeket a szaporítóanyagokat, és a fajta megőrzés mellett a másik nagyon fontos tevékenység, illetve pillére a magháznak az a minőségi szaporítóanyag előállítás és az ehhez biztosított képzés, illetve tudásátadás, úgyhogy emiatt rendszeresen tartunk különböző workshopokat, illetve különböző oktatási programokat, és több kiadvány elkészültében is részt vettünk, például ezt a vetőmagönellátást a gyakorlatban ezt a Nemzeti Génbankkal együtt készítettük, illetve az osztrák, svájci magtermesztők kézikönyvének a lektorálásában is részt vettünk, illetve a hazai adaptálásában. Nagyon gyorsan nézzük meg, hogy is áll jelenleg a magyarországi jogszabályi környezet, ami a mi munkánkat befolyásolja. Ugye, ahogy a Fuli elmondta, 12 direktíva van most hatályban, és ezeket a tagországok adaptálták a saját igényeiknek megfelelően. Magyarországon is több direktíva is van. Itt most kifejezetten ezt a zöldségszaporítóanyag rendeletet raktam be, de ugyanígy van szántóföldi növényekre és különböző terménytípusokra más-más rendelet. A zöldségszaporítóanyag előállítási rendelet a legmegengedőbb ezek közül, mivel itt nem csak azt emelném ki, hogy a génmegőrzés tevékenységek azok kikerülnek a rendelet hatálya alól, hanem itt, amit a magház is kihasznál, bizonyos korlátolt mennyiségek mellett még regisztrált fajtáknak a szaporítóanyagát is elő lehet állítani és forgalomba hozni. A többi rendeletben kifejezetten a génmegőrzést emelik csak ki, tehát hogy az ad számunkra lehetőséget arra, hogy ezeket a fajtákat termesszük és ki tudjuk adni felhasználóknak. Zoli kérdezte, hogy ki számít génmegőrző szervezetnek. A jelenlegi rendelet hatálya alatt nem csak egy állami intézmény lehet génmegőrző szervezet, hanem lehet egy magánszemély is, vagy bármilyen más szervezet, akinek a tevékenységét a génbanki tanács elfogadta. És a magház tagjai közül, akik aktívan fajtafenntartással foglalkoznak, többen is regisztrálták magukat a Nemzeti Génbankban, és a génbanki tanács elfogadta a gyűjteményüket, vagy gyűjteményük egy részét. És ugye egy génmegőrző szervezetnek a hatáskörébe tartozik nem csak a genetikai erőforrások megőrzése, hanem azoknak a mintáinak a kiadása is. Az állami génbankoknál ez ugye kötelező is, hogy rendelkezésre kell bocsájtani ezeket a mintákat. Az alakuló rendeletnek kiválogattam néhány a magházat negatívan vagy pozitívan érintő változását. Ugye ezek potenciális változások, mert ahogy Fuli is elmondta, ugye még folynak a tárgyalások, és különböző szinten különböző verziók vannak éppen életben. Úgyhogy amiket itt leírtam, ezek még nem biztosak, hogy így lesznek, csak szeretném a figyelmet felhívni. Ugye egyrészt, amiről már szó volt, ez a marketing, ez magyarul a forgalmazás, ez a jelenleg a bizottság által szereplő szövegben minden növényi szaporítóanyag átadására vonatkozik, és ezen kívül a szaporítóanyagoknak a tárolása, a tisztítása is beletartozik ebbe. Akkor ugye vannak a vállalkozók, és ez is egy egészen széles körű meghatározás lett a tervezetben, mert ugye ide beletartoznak azok a gazdálkodók, akik saját maguknak is vetőmagot termelnek, illetve minden génbank és génmegőrzéssel foglalkozó szervezet is, így a magház is. És a növényi genetikai erőforrások megőrzése nem mentesül a szabályok alól, mint ahogy azt a direktívákban láttuk, hogy a génmegőrzés az a rendelet hatálya alól hatálya alá nem esik. Ebben az esetben a hatálya alá esik, és egy külön cikk rendelkezik az enyhébb szabályokról. Szerencsére ugye ezek ilyen speciális enyhébb szabályok. És ami már többször megemlítésre került, az az, hogy az eddigiekkel ellentétben egy olyan kezdeményezés fogalmazódott meg, hogy a génbankok, illetve egyéb génmegőrzéssel foglalkozó szervezetek nem adhatnak ki közvetlenül szaporítóanyagot gazdálkodóknak, illetve nem ezek mellett az enyhített szabályok mellett. Ups. És hogy pozitívumokkal zárjam a hozzászólásomat, szeretném kiemelni, hogy fontos célokat fogalmaz meg ez a rendelet, tehát hogy az irány az jó, és reméljük, hogy ezek az iránymutatások, ezek a végleges szövegben is megmutatkoznak majd, tehát kiemelt fontosságot tulajdonítanak a növényi genetikai erőforrások megőrzésének, és a fenntartható mezőgazdálkodás támogatásának. És ugye, ahogy az már szintén elhangzott, és jó hír mindenképp, hogy a végfelhasználók, tehát azok, akik nem árutermelő gazdálkodók, azokra nem vonatkozik a szabályozás, illetve a nemesítés és kutatás is kikerül a rendelet hatálya alól. Sajnos, ahogy mondtam, a génmegőrzés nem. Emellett lobbizunk még mindig. és hogy fontos kivételeket is tesznek. Az egyik az, hogy ezeknek a végfelhasználóknak, tehát a házikerti termesztőknek, akik saját maguknak termesztenek, azoknak nem, tehát hogy ott az árusítás minden szinten enyhített körülmények mellett van, és nem szükséges fajta elismerés sem, illetve ugye ez a conservation variety-t, ezt nem tájfajtának, hanem megőrzendő fajtának fordítja a magyar szöveg, és ahogy már szintén elhangzott, ez egy sokkal tágabb körű megfogalmazás, mint a tájfajtáknak a meghatározása. Itt nem csak a régi fajtákra, hanem új fajtákra is gondolhatunk, amik adott körülményekre lettek nemesítve, és ugye ezek diverzebb fajták, mint egy tusfajta, illetve nincsenek földrajzi környezethez kötve sem, és ugye a mennyiségi korlátozások még mindig vita alatt vannak, de így az első verzióban ezek is sokkal megengedőbbek, mint a tájfajta rendeletben vannak. Úgyhogy bízunk benne, hogy ezek a pozitív pontok, ezek megmaradnak a végső verzióban, és hogy az említett negatív pontokból minél többet sikerül megengedőbbé tenni, amiben igen, leginkább bízunk az, hogy a génmegőrzés az úgy, ahogy van, kikerülhetne a rendelet hatálya alól. És ha bárkinek kérdése van, akkor szívesen válaszolok, de így ennyit készítettem mára.
Thank you very, very, very much, Judith, for this, also putting it into context of currently applicable law in Hungary. And before we get into the question and answers session, I will give now the floor to Agoston. Hi, thank you so much for being here, and you will present the perspective of an organic farmer, but I'll let you introduce yourself the way you see fit, and you can also talk in English or Hungarian as you wish. Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me? Is it fine? Thank you, perfect. I'm a bit tired at the end of the day, so I would be rather talk in Hungarian if it's fine. És köszöntök mindenkit. Én igazából egy rövid előadással és igazából tapasztalat megosztással készültem arra, illetve szerettem volna elmondani, hogy mivel is foglalkozunk. Hoztam egy pár képet, de egy rendes prezentációt nem, de legalább tudok mutatni a gazdaságról, ami izgalmas lehet, ha bejön, de nem hagyja. Jó, akkor majd ezt legközelebb. Alapvetően azt szerettem volna csak elmesélni és elmondani, hogy mivel is foglalkozunk. Mi egy 260 hektáros szántóföldi növénytermesztés végzünk bioba, tehát biogazdálkodunk most már 10. éve, és eljutottunk odáig az elmúlt 4-5 évben, hogy különösképpen kalászos gabonákra fókuszálunk, 50% a vetésforgónknak mindig kalászos gabonákból áll, és ezt most már saját feldolgozóban egy kisüzemi asztrié köves malmon dolgozzuk fel, és direktbe értékesítünk készterméket, lisztet pékségeknek, kézműves pékségeknek, kovásztal dolgozó kézműves pékségeknek Magyarországon. És ez azért nagyon érdekes, és azért izgalmas, mert ez egy olyan piac és olyan kereslet, ahol az emberek nyitottak és érdeklődőek az iránt, hogy régi tájfajtákkal és különleges fajtákkal dolgozzanak, és ebbe tudunk számukra adni mi egy olyan egyedi vertikumot, amit amúgy bárhol máshol konvencionális gazdaságban vagy nagyüzemi gazdálkodásban nem lehet megtalálni. És itt jön szóba a vetőmag, és hogy nekünk milyen kapcsolatunk van a vetőmagtermesztéssel. Alapvetően a szabályozásról nyilván itt hazai szinten a hazai körülmények között tájékozódom, a nemzetközi szabályozásban nem vagyok annyira benne, de nagyon jó volt ezt az összefoglalót hallgatni, és látni, hogy merre tartunk, hová megyünk. Ami számomra fontos, és úgymond érdekeltségem is van benne, hogy tájfajták bekerültek nálunk a kalászos vetésforgóba, és egyre nagyobb számban. Tehát foglalkozunk most már 5. éve alakorral, tönkebúzával, és tájfajta észtivum búzákkal, amiket többek közt génbankból, kutatóintézeten keresztül kaptunk meg, és nagyon jó tapasztalataink vannak ezekkel. Illetve mindemellett be van állítva nálunk most már szintén 4. éve minden évben egy mezoparcellás kísérlet, illetve egy mikroparcellás fajta kísérlet, ahova meg jelenlegi modern fajta tulajdonosok is hozzák a saját fajtáikat, de emellett a Ökológiai Mezőgazdasági Kutatóintézet, az ÖMKI hozza a saját tájfajta kísérleteit is. Tehát elég aktívan benne vagyunk a kalászos gabonák és az ősgabonák termesztésében, és látjuk ezeknek a gyakorlatait, és azt gondoljuk, hogy ez nagyon fontos, hogy jelen legyen a piacon, és szeretnénk hosszú távon, és hiszek abban, hogy ezeket hosszú távon mind a beltartalmi értékeik miatt, mind a különleges fajta tulajdonságaik miatt és termeszthetőségük miatt előtérbe fogják helyezni. És ha már itt szabályozás és kérdéskör, hogy miként használjuk ezt, és adunk ebből mondjuk piacra, vagy saját magunk dolgozzuk föl, ugye nagy részben mi ezt magunk dolgozzuk fel, illetve a korábbiakban mi még termeltünk vetőmagot szerződésen keresztül vetőmagüzemeknek is, de ugye ezt arra irányítottuk, hogy egy saját vetőmagfeldolgozót létesítettünk, tehát van saját tisztítógépünk, megvan a teljes berendezésünk arra, hogy szántóföldi magokat és növényeket tisztítani tudjunk, és elő tudjunk állítani magunknak elsősorban saját felhasználásra, és legyen minden évben egy szelekció. De nem titok, hogy hosszú távon az is tervben van, hogy ezekkel ne csak mi magunk foglalkozzunk, hanem adott esetben én egy integrált rendszerben kiadjam ezt másnak is, és mások is termeljenek nekem ugyanebből a vetőmagból, amit mi adott esetben megőrzünk, fajta fenntartunk, és hosszú távon hasznosítani szeretnénk, és örülünk annak is, hogyha ezeket a tájfajták mások is népszerűsítik, és igénybe veszik. És idén először kaptunk egyébként a már korábban említett hazai génbankból 10 olyan észtívum búzát, ami az elmúlt 100 évben nem volt használva. Ezek most elsősorban mikroparcellás kísérletbe kerülnek, de a jövőben szeretnénk ezt is termelésbe venni, és hosszú távon bízunk benne, hogy ebből is olyan egyedi értékeket tudunk hazahozni, ami az egész közeg számára izgalmas. Illetve gondolkozunk, meg foglalkozunk ugye jelenleg is populációkkal, dinamikus populációkkal, ahol pedig pont azt tartom értéknek, hogy minden gazdálkodó a saját termelésében egyedi anyagot állít elő, és azt nagyon fontosnak tartom, hogy ezt a lehető legegyszerűbben minden adminisztráció és vizsgálat nélkül adott esetben tovább is tudja adni, mert ezek attól maradnak dinamikusak, és attól maradnak különlegesek, hogy itt gazdák közösen ezt cseréljük, vagy forgalmazzuk őket. Valójában röviden ennyi, és sajnos nem tudtam megosztani a képeket, úgyhogy ezért elnézést.